So people who go from a lying down to a sedentary to a moving, every time you make those changes, it changes the amount of calories. However, not necessarily that significantly. And that's some of the recent research right now saying, okay, even if you have a Fitbit and you're tracking, don't think that that justifies having a mocha frappuccino and a scone every day, because you might then be in energy imbalance. Okay, so one of the things is when we look back, and what we construe from looking back, because we both weren't alive at that time, is that the reality is that people were much more active in the course of the day. They weren't sitting at their laptops, they weren't using their telephones, they were actually on their feet doing physical labor. Here's some things you need to think about, and the reality for them, and I think it's just a slap in the face, is your appetite doesn't automatically change when you put your behind in the chair. You really have to work on that and start to gradually make those changes to what is going to be normal, and expect that it's going to be hard, because it is hard.
Leslie Bonci, and are you in Pittsburgh?
I am. We live right in the city of Pittsburgh. I am Pittsburgh born and bred, and it's a beautiful day, but a little chilly today.
A little chilly. I just got back from a workout, and it's about 82 here in Oahu. So come over and visit us sometime and enjoy where we are. So these, could you fill us in? You've got a scholastic background, and you also help people in the corporate world and the private sector. A little bit about how you got into this field, Leslie, and what you do on an average week.
Sure, I am. Didn't really like where I went to school, graduated early, went to school in public health, took a nutrition class, fell in love with it, and decided that I needed to have that kind of a focus. Public health focus, really helping people to optimize what it is they do for their health, for their body, and had the opportunity as my first job to work very closely with exercise physiologists. It was a marriage made in heaven. That reason to think about our hand-to-mouth activity and our physical activity and how they work together to optimize whatever it is we're trying to do. And then that kind of evolved into working with professional athletes as well as active people of all ages, from little to older individuals. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful career that has also now expanded to the culinary aspect. So the physical activity in the kitchen, not just when we're outside doing our exercise.
So diet books, if you've looked at people's homes from the 1960s and through now, diet and cooking books often line the shelves at a person's home. Are people actually using these books?
You know what? I think they're collector's items at this point more than anything else. But what's interesting is when we look through the history of the books that are out there, is what used to be recommendations for diet, a lot of that was contingent upon the size of the plate that people had, which was actually normal instead of platters. And and the fact that people were actually in their kitchen cooking because you weren't ordering takeout, you weren't going to restaurants all the time. You just didn't do that. So it's all very, very different right now.
When I lived in France in the late 70s and early 80s, the normal working family almost never went to a restaurant. Many people in France had large families at that time, 4 or 5 kids, and they would never think of going to a restaurant. Whereas in America, we had already started with smaller families by that time. They were still maybe a generation before in the way they practiced some of their family planning. But people didn't go out to restaurants, and I think the diets were very well balanced. And meat is something that I mentioned in my book as on my grandparents' era, they had these big Sunday meals. So meat was the special occasion back in the 1930s and 40s, unless you were the butcher or you lived on a farm. But meat was expensive, and refrigeration had only been a few decades old at that time. So have you looked into meat consumption over the 20th century, comparing that to now?
Yeah, it certainly has changed, and there, as people are thinking about it from a health standpoint, so some of the recommendations around meat have changed because of the concern of intake of certain types of meat, quantity of meat related to an increased risk of heart disease, and now we've got an emphasis on more plant-based eating and more different eating patterns than we've ever had before. And it's starting to come full circle, but interestingly, in countries of the world where it was very much meat as a side, meat is now moving to the center of the plate. So it's all about education, and it's all about choice, and it's also all about dietary patterning overall for people to figure out for themselves what works within their calorie cap, within their salary cap, and within their culinary ability.
Those are 3 beautiful bullet points. I hope those are going to appear in your next book.
Oh, don't worry, they will be there.
So Leslie, the idea of food as a fixer of problems. I went to a conference, and a dietitian, actually a registered dietitian, spoke. She works at the hospital in the area where I was visiting, and she talked about all the things that food can do. So you take this for that, and you mix in this for that condition. And my comment to her, I said, what about just giving the stomach and the body a rest from food and letting the body reorganize itself, which is known as fasting, or just taking a break from food?
Well, there are some studies that have looked at intermittent fasting, and the studies are not conclusive to say across the board that it's beneficial. Well, a lot of those studies have been more animal-based than they have been more human-based. And the reality is people fast for lots of different reasons. People fast because they're going to have surgery, upcoming surgery. People fast for religious reasons. People fast because they just don't feel well. However, the issue of all of this is that in the absence of food, even though people think it's giving the gut a break, the reality is that the gut knows what to do with the food that we consume, and in the absence of food, you still have to fuel the organs of the body. They don't go to sleep. The brain does not go to sleep. When it does that, we're dead. The heart does not go to sleep, and so we have to find a way to fuel it without causing the body to go catabolic, or basically breaking itself down. So I think there are times where people might step back from what it is they're doing and make some changes to eating, but overall, again, we're looking at patterns, and over the course of a week and over the course of a month, how does it all balance itself out?
I gotcha. So let's check in on your point of view on these retired athletes. I sent you something about calorie consumption and that Pittsburgh study, and I haven't been able to find many more details on it, but it talks about people back in 1910 consuming in excess of 5,000 calories a day. And that seemed like a lot to me when Michael Phelps, who is a person who his body actually needs. He has a hard time keeping on tissue in his normal life. And when he's doing 5 hours of training a day, he has a very hard time. So he was consuming in excess of 5,000 to 7,000 calories a day during his peak years. What are your thoughts on calorie consumption back in the beginning of the 20th century? And we'll take it from there.
Okay, so one of the things is when we look back, and what we construe from looking back, because we both weren't alive at that time, is that the reality is that people were much more active in the course of the day. They weren't sitting at their laptops, they weren't using their telephones, they were actually on their feet doing physical labor. And when people were more active, that required more calories in. And we certainly have not evolved that way around the world, but certainly here in the US, if people are on their behind the majority of the day, nobody had that luxury at that particular point in time. There were a lot of active jobs, people working in steel mills, people working on farms, people doing things that required their body to expend calories over the course of the day, and they weren't necessarily doing exercise in that sense of the word. Their whole day was about movement, but they weren't going on the elliptical. It just wasn't around them at that time.
So the more calorie consumption if they had it. So some people were poor, and we see those pictures in the Great Depression of people with a belt size that would be, I'm a thin person, but the belt size for someone with my skeletal structure might have been on 3 notches below where mine is. I mean, the saggy pants, people who didn't have access to food in the way we do today. So not everyone was consuming more calories, but maybe the ones who had jobs and were doing it weren't in the soup lines and weren't looking for jobs. They needed lots of calories because of the physical day.
Well, that's it. And it's all that matter of balance over the course of the day. So one side of that equation is intake, and the other side of that equation is output, which again is more than just exercise. It's things people do over the course of the day. So people who go from a lying down to a sedentary to a moving, every time you make those changes, it changes the amount of calories. However, not necessarily that significantly. And that's some of the recent research right now saying, okay, even if you have a Fitbit and you're tracking, don't think that that justifies having a mocha frappuccino and a scone every day, because you might then be in energy imbalance.
Yeah, there you go. So I'm going to ask you about these athletes. So these athletes, they're very young people these days. And even for the last 30 years, they've been making decisions about what they're going to do athletically at a very young age. So they're not learning about a balanced lifestyle in general. They're being trained by coaches. They're being driven by their parents, and they're going on road trips, even sometimes when they're 8 years old. These soccer tournaments. I know kids who were 10 that went to play teams in Europe at age 10. So, and that's a 12 years ago news. So these athletes are being trained in this performance capacity at a very young age. And so they're learning about diet for performance, sleep for performance, traveling for performance. They're not learning about recreation and a balanced diet. They are sitting when they're in school, so they're learning about being sedentary, but they're not being trained on what to do when this athletic endeavor ends. And so if we look at the person, let's say they leave when they're an 18-year-old done with high school. I know people who looked at their prep school and they got a scholarship because of gymnastics or female basketball, and they put all 5 hours a day into that sport at like a Catholic private school. And then all of a sudden they got out when they were 18 and they said, that's it, I'm done. I've got, the school costs $35,000, $40-some thousand a year. I did all of this and now I'm 18 and I'm done. Or we look at someone who may have done that through college or may have done that through the military and now they're 24, 28, or someone like Michael Phelps in their mid 30s, and then they flip the switch and they walk into being a normal person. What does this person do, and how are they coached to allow for the change of lifestyle and the change of output from the high performance years to the regular person years?
Well, it was actually just in Indianapolis at the NFL Combine, and this was one of the things that we were talking about, is the idea of retuning that athlete when he or she is done with sport to transition back to a normal life. And especially true in football, where a lot of these guys are forcing this weight on, and all of a sudden it's like, I'm not moving anymore, and it's a rude awakening. Well, I just can't do that. And it takes time for them to make the changes. But we really talk about exit interviews and do a lot with that as somebody's getting towards the end of the career. Is okay, here's some things you need to think about, and the reality for them, and I think it's just a slap in the face, is your appetite doesn't automatically change when you put your behind in the chair. You really have to work on that and start to gradually make those changes to what is going to be normal, and expect that it's going to be hard, because it is hard. And at the same time, interestingly, from the exercise perspective, for somebody who's played soccer all their life, basketball, whatever, is that, I'm transitioning to the elliptical. Well, that's not really anything, because I'm used to running up and down the court. So they have to redefine and re-examine what that new norm is going to be for them in terms of exercise, as well as that hand-to-mouth exercise.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thanks, Leslie. The idea of the physiological side of the person not needing all those calories. So you're saying that there's a switch, and it takes time in some cases to recondition that person into normalcy. And look at that their tissue. If they're a person that had built up a lot of bulk, their tissue is going to start to diminish. People talk about my muscles turning to fat. It doesn't actually work that way, but they're seeing their musculature. If it's going to be the same size, fat's going to have to replace it on someone who built themselves up to this, extra 40% of musculature. And then we look at the emotional side. So let's say they had their endorphins flowing, the camaraderie, the kudos, the highs from performance, and even training with their comrades in arms, so to speak. Then they don't have that emotional high, and they walk out into being a civilian. They say, thank goodness, no more coaching, no more heavy duty, no more hill runs, no plyometrics. And now what do I do? And so they sit, or they get a job. A lot of the people in my book, they talk about how their friends who are not practicing fitness after the time they retire as an athlete, they're excessive people, and so they're wired for excessiveness. So they go into excessive workaholic mode. They may own a sports bar. They may be in a nonprofit, or they may be a super mom that just puts all the energy into the child, or they may be a super couch potato. So the emotional side of eating, which is very common, let's leave our 12-hour day or 8-hour day, and let's go to the cafe in the corporate complex or down in the corner, and let's get out of here, and let's spend the $6 on the mocha, which is a pretty large drink, and satisfy our boredom with this something that's going to satiate us emotionally.
Hi, this is Sifu Slim, author of The Aging Athlete. In this book, you're going to get to hear about two different groups of former high-performance athletes. One group, which is made up of 90% of the former athletes, does not do physical activity on a regular basis and tends to suffer the consequences of a sedentary lifestyle. The other group, which is made up of 10% of the former athletes, is doing physical activity on a regular basis and tends to thrive through the aging process, or at least has a better chance at coping with the aging process. We could have taken these folks to a lab and done all kinds of tests on them. Instead, we slowed them down and sat them down and asked them, in their own words, to describe why they're wired the way they are, so that we all, former athletes and non-athletes, can use some of their inspirational and motivational and mindset lessons in our own lives. I hope you pick up a copy today. You can go to theagingathlete.com. And when you have a chance to read it, I'd love to hear back from you to find out what your thoughts are on the stories of these aging athletes.
It's emotional.
Well, there's no doubt about it, because food is comfort. And, most people don't derive that level of comfort from a stalk of broccoli. It doesn't work that way. And, and part of it is what is that replacement? Because it's a big void. It's a really big void for a football player who is used to being around his buddies, his teammates, 8 to 10 hours a day for the majority of the year. And all of a sudden, that's not there. And so nobody thinks about it. Well, it's just easy. Well, you'll just change your diet. Well, you just change your exercise. And no, there really is a huge psychological component and a lot of hand holding that needs to go along with that to help people make that transition appropriately.
Thank you. The sports psychologist for book 1 on the aging athlete, he said athletes are the only people we ask to die twice. And it's once when they retire, or they get injured and have to retire, and then once when they die and they leave their bodies. And so this is it's quite a challenge for the athlete. You think of taking a child at age 4 to preschool, that first day that you drop them off, or maybe even at age 3, and there's often that connection with the parent that's being broken, and some kids make the transition. I don't know what the percentage was. I didn't have a problem. I love the activity, and having my mom say, hey, you're going to have fun, and I actually believed her, and I did have fun. But some kids, when they walk into that preschool or kindergarten, there's that connection, that bond that's broken, and they're going to feel that for a while. And I would guess that an athlete leaving 10 years, 20 years of being around other people in that sports endeavor is quite a challenge. And they may welcome the absence of the heavy duty training, just like someone who leaves boot camp and thinks, hey, that's it. But there are many things that they're not factoring in, and a lot of it happens in the unconscious mind.
Absolutely. There is no doubt about it, and something that we don't take lightly, and something that really needs to come to the forefront more. And in professional sports, it's like, ooh, that's the touchy-feely stuff. Nobody wants to do that because it takes time. You can't have that conversation in 5 minutes with a player who is ready to retire. And just as we have entrance interviews and they do all these kinds of things at the combine, it's the same thing on the other side, preparing you for life after, retuning, redefining, figuring it out of what are you going to do once you walk through those doors and you know you're not coming back.
Do you have the contact info of some of the people who run the combine?
I do.
Yeah,
and
I would love to send them a copy of The Aging Athlete and see if I could leave a breakout session there for the young people.
Yeah, and you know what, as it is it always gets so crazy for them because there's so much going on. It's literally like a meat market, and somebody's evaluating this and this and this and this and this. So getting any time in front of them, it typically doesn't happen because of that. And so there's all these other meetings that happen on the periphery, but I was involved with. So we never get FaceTime with these guys because they are just like every minute of their day. It's like their dance card is beyond full. It is just exploded.
Gotcha. I'm going to show you what I'm drinking right here. So I'm not down at the corner cafe imbibing on mochas, and I don't think it's not that I don't think they're tasteful, and I do like the experience of hanging out in a cafe. But what I'm doing is a wellness drink, and this is building up my immunity. And so I've got in filtered water. These guys are cloves floating around, and many benefits on cloves. And they're very tasty. I've really enjoyed the taste of those. And then in the bottom, there's 2 different powders. I've got ginger powder and turmeric powder. And then there's some hunks of turmeric. Hawaii is known for the root, the turmeric root, and you can get them at the farmers markets. And I keep them in the freezer, and then I just take them out, and they cut very nicely when they're frozen. So I cut them and pop them in this drink. And so, you know, this concoction didn't cost me very much, and it's providing a lot of wellness, and it also is preserving the water with my mouth germs transferring in. It's really hard, I would think, for bacteria and other things to grow in here. So this is what how I roll, so to speak, and maybe you can share your thoughts on how people would think about this. I don't know, you have a son. What would your son think of this?
Yeah, you know, I think he would probably look at it and say, "Look," but the reality is that both turmeric and ginger are roots that I recommend all the time to everybody, and not just my athletes, because of the anti-inflammatory effect, because of some of the research now looking at benefit of turmeric in particular and our mind, and that's critically important for everybody to preserve a healthy mind. And ginger from the standpoint of the digestive benefit, particularly around decreasing the risk of nausea. So, you know, sometimes when people are physically active or even not physically active, they get that feeling in their stomach, and ginger can be extremely beneficial. And a lot of people find it, you know, it's pungent, it's an overwhelming taste. So when you dilute it in water, then you're still getting the benefit of the fluid, but you're also getting the value added with the turmeric and the ginger.
Yeah, and then sometimes I throw in some cinnamon, and cinnamon has many lovely properties. One that they talk about is the balancing of your blood sugar levels, which when people are throwing in a lot of quick, easily digested sugar carbohydrates, their blood sugar can be on a little bit of an up and down streak. You have any thoughts on cinnamon?
The research that's been done on cinnamon has really looked specifically at people who have type 2 diabetes. So if somebody's blood glucose is normal, it doesn't seem to be that same effect. And for somebody with type 1 or insulin-dependent diabetes, it doesn't seem to be the same effect. But for those with type 2, so non-insulin dependent, indeed, there may be a benefit of helping to stabilize the blood glucose so you don't get the highs and the lows. And interestingly, the cinnamon might also have an effect on lowering blood cholesterol. So it's a 2-for-1, and that can be a positive. Plus, it gives a natural sweetness without any calories in it and without any added sugars.
So when I approached you a week ago, I mentioned that I was at Whole Foods, and I met a woman, and she was buying blueberries. And how I met her was she knocked over the blueberries, and
Uh-oh.
they were scurrying about, and they were really nice blueberries. I said, there they go. But I'm helping her pick those blueberries up and put them in her cart. And I said, "Who are the blueberries for?" And she said, "They're for my child, age 2." And I said, "Is your child eating blueberries throughout the day?" And she said, "Yeah, he's very finicky. He loves blueberries, and so he doesn't like to eat a lot of these things." And I said, "Well, I wonder how we can get some fat and protein." And I said, "What about nuts? Would your son eat nuts?" And she said, "I don't know. I'm going to have to try." And I said, "Well, if they haven't had their teeth formed yet, you can get a coffee grinder and you can grind them up, and you could put them in a whole milk yogurt or some other contraption to make it a little bit easier for that person on a spoon to get the nuts in the mouth and to play around with a little bit of mushiness and a little bit of nuts." Do you have any recommendations for moms with finicky kids?
Yeah, and a lot of times I will say that I think that some of the finickiness comes from the mom to the child. So if we ourselves don't eat the food, then we make those faces around the food, then it decreases likelihood that our kids are going to eat the food too. And also, I think a lot of parents don't realize that it literally is 10 tries for a food. So if our child doesn't like food the first time around, we're going to introduce it more time, because initially if it's a different taste, it could be because it's bitter or sour, or it's a different texture, or there's just a color. All those things can be influencers, and so don't give up on the first time. If after 10 it doesn't work and you don't introduce it every single day, damn it, you're going to eat these blueberries if you like it or not. But if we do it over time, we may actually surprise ourselves and have kids that are a little bit less picky. And sometimes too, let's not forget about the fact that toddlers, this is who's in control here. And if that child makes all of this fuss about not wanting to eat things and knows that that upsets mom, then that's behavior that's going to be enforced. I do it every single time because I know it makes my mother crazy. So we have to really assume some of the impassive phase and just calm down. I have 2 sons and we have a grandson now who's he's not eating yet, but this is one of those things you kind of learn through experience, is not to get frustrated early on, and never ever let your kids see that, because that way you've lost the battle from the beginning.
The diet is such a popular thing. I preach mind, body, and spirit health, and my default setting is physical movement, because I think that's something that we overlook. We tend to, there's a lot of thought out there that has people thinking that exercise is a penalty for being sedentary. It's a penalty. So exercise is also a penalty for being overweight. Exercise is a penalty for your high stress rate. So I try to switch that completely and get people on maintenance fitness. So it's not high performance, although at age 54, I can do a hard workout. I don't do that every day because I know my body in the unconscious mind is going to say that's too much. And I'll also probably break down my joints and be too fatigued to do my work. But there are many people out there who do what I call the pendulum, and they have a marriage coming up and they want to get in shape to get married, or they have some mud run that they want to get into, and so they do this performance, this transformational fitness, and then they go back to being sedentary and eating probably incorrectly in many cases. So my default setting is to get people on maintenance so that the exercise is actually a joy. It's recreational, joyful movement, going out and enjoying nature. I'm very rarely inside unless it's like a martial arts class or yoga class, which I would prefer to do both outside. But because of the way these businesses work, they have their studios, and that's how they derive their income, and that's how they protect people sometimes from the elements and have all their equipment. So what are your thoughts on not only getting people into the natural living with food? Maybe you can share that first. And then secondly, getting people into this joyful movement so it's not this penalty.
Well, I think it's all of a journey, and it all is a very individualized response. And so when we look at food, the first thing is getting people from this idea of being foodies to foodies. And foodies doesn't mean you're eating gourmet all the time, but it also doesn't mean you have the list. This is good, this is bad, I will, I won't, because it's just exhausting. And that people find something that they can do with their diet that is sustainable. We use that word a lot for environmental concerns, and rightfully so. But sustainable sustainable means that it's something you could do longer than 3 months, that you can do for the rest of your life. And that means if you do drastically different things, you're not going to be able to sustain those behaviors. And it also should be about foods that provide us comfort. And there's a lot of foods that do. And foods that are within our price point, because otherwise, it just doesn't make sense either. And we all have different tastes and textures that we like, so it can't be one size fits all. Customizing. And the same thing actually happens from the exercise perspective. And I would say that where movement occurs, active movement, it's not just I'm going outside or I'm taking a class. You can be active in your kitchen. If you make bread, you're kneading. That's physical activity. If you're chopping things, it's activity. You can do chores in your home, not that we love to, but we need to, and that's part of the activity for the day, and it just casts a much broader net and makes people feel more included instead of excluded from a healthy lifestyle.
Wonderful points. If you were to go on a hike in the cold, let's say it's 38 degrees in Pennsylvania, and you're all suited up with your Gore-Tex and your beanies, etc., and you were going to go out on a 3.5 to 5 hour hike, do you have any certain foods that you would bring along with you?
Yeah, and seeing as it's 20 here today, so it's even a little colder than that. But yes, and so the first thing is bringing things that you know aren't going to freeze, because then you'll break a tooth. I mean, people don't think about this, is that even some of the bars, they get really hard in the cold, and then you try and eat that and it doesn't work. So things where the texture doesn't change. For instance, nuts actually won't freeze. They don't freeze solid. So that's something that you can bring with you. Same thing with a dried fruit won't freeze solid, or even something like a freeze-dried fruit is an option because it's lightweight. So you don't want to be bogged down necessarily with things. Those work really, really well. Sometimes people even do like little packets of nut butter. That's an option, or even something like making their own trail mix. And I would suggest that only because there's a lot of things I don't like in commercial ones. So I have to do it myself. So if you do a cereal, if you do a nut, or even if you do something like a roasted chickpea and some kind of a fruit, you can make that sweet or you can make that savory, and it gives you something that's portable, it's non-perishable, and it's palatable.
So a Bodhi bag, which are those backpack type bags, I guess you would have to put that inside your Gore-Tex, and if it was, within 3 layers of your back, that probably wouldn't freeze. I wonder if the hose, if you had one of those contraptions with a Bodhi bag with a hose right here, I wonder if that would freeze if you were hiking around because of your body heat. I guess it would freeze.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, because your body temperature is always going to be where it needs to be, and it's going to be insulated, especially with the extra layers. And so if you had it outside, yes, it might. If you have it inside, so you have one other layer of clothing on top of it, then that will protect it enough that it won't freeze up.
Got it. So you have that one extra shell, they call it, and then you have the hose going inside of that and just go right to here. So those are good points. Why don't you share, Leslie, your website and what type of, if you do private consulting, how someone could connect with you for what you do, some, reorganizing their diet and their, maybe their mindset for doing the right thing.
Absolutely. My website is Active Eating Advice, all one word, activeeatingadvice.com. And I actually have a lot of people that I work with via Skype, distance, because not everybody lives here in the city of Pittsburgh. I have people I work with in New Zealand, other countries of the world. So I can do that. And my philosophy about eating is more about tweaking, fine-tuning, because again, the overhaul thing doesn't work. So I usually ask people to do some work up front. I like them to keep a record for me, however it is they want to do that, of not only what they're eating. I don't judge people, but I want to know what their patterns are, what they eat, when they have it, how much they have. Are they eating out all the time? Are they doing their own food prep? If they are active, when during the day are they eating? What is their fluid intake like? I ask all of those questions because the more information I have, the better outcome I can give to that person and really help them. And I have a lot of people that I see that have underlying health issues. So somebody might have diabetes, somebody might have high cholesterol, somebody might have digestive issues. So I need to know if there are things going on with blood work. I need to know if people are on medications. I want to know if they're taking supplements, all of that. I'm very nosy, but I do it for a reason. The more somebody gives me, the more I can give back.
You have to be nosy. You have to be inquisitive. And when someone connects with you, they can probably get an hour of your time, if not more. And when they go in to see the typical MD or physician assistant, it might be an 8-minute appointment. Boy, how much time after the greeting and them looking at your records are they going to have to interact to find out some of these things and to watch your reaction to the questions? So what a blessing for people to be able to spend more time with you. Would you also list some of the types of speaking that you do and what types of events and conferences you're willing to send abstracts to?
Yeah, I do a lot of speaking. I speak at various universities. I speak to dietetic association meetings at the state level, at the national level. I'm going to be going to South Africa in October to speak, which should be very, very exciting for a sports medicine conference. Those are things that I am passionate about. But I also speak at high schools as well, or speak at middle schools, or sometimes it might be just a community group that is interested in hearing more about this topic. We have local runners group. Pittsburgh has a marathon every year. I've done a lot of the presentations for them, or even at REI to talk to people about what they're doing when they're preparing for their day-long hike. So it's a lot of different topics on a lot of different things, some of them related to sports performance, some of them related to some of the myths around nutrition right now, some related to weight management, because that's always a hot topic for people. They always want to know those things. Digestive disorders are one of my subspecialties, so I could talk about that all day, and do enjoy doing those types of things.
Yeah, I would be welcoming a future conversation with you on digestive disorders, autoimmune, and weight loss, and managing, once you do lose some weight, managing the weight loss. So maybe we can look into having a conversation about those. Being silly is something that I always promote too, because we tend to be neurotic. We've got so much to do in our day. We've got continuing ed. We're helping out other family members. We're supposed to read this book for learning capacity. So being silly is something that I'm going to invite you to do with me. Would you be able to stand up and do 20 jumping jacks with me?
Oh, okay, surely.
And if you count along with me, then we'll see you on the camera, because this camera is sensitive to voice.
Okay. All right. Yep.
You look like an active person, Leslie.
I am.
So why don't we start from 20 and then we'll go down to 0. 3, 2, 1. 20.
19. 18. 17. 16. 15. 14. 13. 12. 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
A few punches. Fantastic. So we're so pleased, Leslie, to have spent half an hour or so with you this morning. We look forward to coming back again and tapping into some of your gems of wisdom. So wishing you all the best, and keep moving and enjoy those nuts, and be nutty, and encourage your son today to get off the computer and to be nutty with you.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks so much.
Thanks, Leslie. Aloha.
Aloha. Bye-bye.